In 2016, America elected a political outsider. What followed was 4 years of chaos, division, and relentless challenges to democratic norms. See just how far a president could stretch the limits of the Constitution. Now, that test has a name: Project 2025, developed by the Heritage Foundation and backed by a network of powerful right-wing organizations. Detailed plan to reshape the U.S. government into a tool of total executive power. It lays out in chilling detail how a future conservative president, very likely Donald Trump, could take control of every major federal agency. Agenda nationwide. Unlike the spontaneous outbursts of Trump's first term, this plan is methodical, strategic, and deeply dangerous. It's not about governing better, it's about governing without limits. With Project 2025, Trump or his successor wouldn't just return to the White House. They would walk in on day one with a ready-made script to dismantle democracy from the inside out. This isn't just another political threat to the very structure of American democracy. And if we don't understand what's coming or how it builds directly on what Trump already did, we may not be able to stop it. What follows is a breakdown of how Trump's first term paved the way, and how Project 2025 could turn that chaos into permanent control. Project 2025 isn't just a political initiative, it's a revolutionary blueprint to dismantle and rebuild the American government in the image of far-right ideology. Launched by the Heritage Foundation and endorsed by dozens of conservative think tanks, this 1,000-plus page manifesto is designed to prepare a Republican president, particularly Trump, for absolute control from the moment they take office. Unlike ordinary transition plans, which are typically boring procedural roadmaps for staffing and policy goals, Project 2025 is brazenly ideological. It calls for nothing less than a complete seizure of the executive branch. It proposes firing tens of thousands of federal workers, career experts, scientists, analysts, and civil servants, and replacing them with partisan loyalists who will obey the president, not the Constitution. This is where it gets even more dangerous. Project 2025 isn't just about day one. It envisions a long-term transformation, bedding loyal operatives deep within federal agencies, rewriting laws through executive orders, and erasing decades of progressive legislation and civil rights protections. Think of it as a hostile takeover of the federal bureaucracy, aimed at bending every lever of government to serve a single ideological vision: anti-immigration. Gut the Department of Education to advance religious schooling. Dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency to please oil giants. And reorient the Justice Department to act as the president's personal law firm. Worse, it proposes stripping the independence of institutions like the FBI, IRS, and CDC, turning them into tools of control rather than protectors of public good. It is the playbook of authoritarianism disguised as a policy plan. Donald Trump's presidency was not merely chaotic, it was experimental authoritarianism in real time. Many political observers believed the chaos was the strategy itself, but viewed through the lens of Project 2025. His first term now looks less like random disruption and more like a deliberate stress test of the U.S. constitutional system. The failures, the firings, the scandals, these were lessons. And now, those lessons have been written into a manual for for permanent power. Trump's term revealed how fragile American democracy can be. He tested nearly every institutional boundary, demanding loyalty from intelligence agencies, refusing to divest from personal business interests, pressuring foreign governments to investigate rivals, and declaring the press the enemy of the people. When his officials refused to carry out illegal orders or resisted political interference, he fired them. From FBI Director James Comey to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the instinct for autocracy, he lacked the infrastructure. He was often thwarted by courts, public backlash, or even his own staff. That won't happen with Project 2025 in place. The plan calls for pre-vetted loyalists, trained in advance, ready to flood the executive branch on day one. These aren't just yes-men. They're ideologically driven foot soldiers, selected to carry out Trump's will without hesitation or question. In his first term, Trump struggled to bend institutions to his desires. In a second term under Project 2025, the institutions won't push back. They'll be reshaped to obey. This is the terrifying difference. We've already seen how dangerous Trump can be when constrained. Armed with legal justification, loyal enforcers, and a written plan to obliterate opposition. That's not just a presidency, that's a regime. Trump's first term showed us what happens when a leader bends the rules, when the rules themselves are rewritten to eliminate resistance. This document doesn't just plan for a second Trump term, it weaponizes it. Where Trump once relied on chaotic firings and spur-of-the-moment loyalty tests, every agency into an arm of the president's will. One of the plan's most alarming features is its commitment to reviving and expanding Schedule F. This reclassification would strip civil service protections from tens of thousands of federal workers, making it easier to fire them for political reasons. Career professionals, scientists at the CDC, lawyers at the DOJ, economists at Treasury be replaced by operatives who pledge loyalty not to the law but to the president himself. In practice, this turns neutral government agencies into political battalions. Project 2025. The Department of Justice, for example, would no longer function independently. Instead, it would be remade into an enforcement arm that executes the president's agenda, prosecuting political opponents, blocking investigations into allies, and ensuring legal immunity for those in power. The Department of Homeland Security could be used to accelerate mass deportations, expand domestic surveillance, and even invoke military authority for internal enforcement, all in the name of security. Economic institutions are also in the crosshairs. The Federal Reserve, historically independent, would face direct presidential pressure to control inflation. Top-down control, with military leadership filtered through political litmus tests. This isn't normal governance. This is total executive domination, a centralization of power not seen in the United States since its founding, with chilling echoes of autocratic takeovers in other nations. Where Trump's first term improvised authoritarianism, Project 2025 turns it into a well-oiled machine of control. No authoritarian system survives without tight control over information and fear among those who speak out. Project 2025 anticipates this and lays the foundation for a dramatic rollback of transparency, freedom of the press, and civil discourse. Weaponization of government against those who exercise it. One of the first targets the Freedom of Information Act, FUIA, under Project 2025's proposals. It becomes easier for federal agencies to deny document requests, bury data, and operate in the shadows. Whistleblowers would face retaliation, not protection. Journalists investigating corruption or abuse of power would find doors closed and penalties looming. The press would now be under sustained, coordinated pressure. Media access to agencies would be tightly controlled. Public communication could be filtered through loyalty-based appointees. Misinformation from the government itself, false claims, manipulated statistics, politically driven narratives would become normalized and harder to challenge. Project 2025 also aims to curb ideological diversity in education and civil society. It proposes defunding or eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion day programs across federal agencies, universities, and public institutions. It seeks to censor curricula that address systemic racism, gender identity, or climate change, labeling them as radical ideologies instead of critical knowledge. More dangerously, surveillance powers that were once restricted to national security threats could be redirected toward protesters, journalists, and activists. If you oppose the regime, you may be flagged. If you speak out, you may be investigated. It's not just about silencing dissent, it's about criminalizing it. Under Project 2025, information stops being a public right and becomes a state-controlled commodity. The free press becomes a target. The truth becomes negotiable. Bruce stands on the edge of being permanently gagged. Project 2025 doesn't just aim to reshape government, it seeks to reshape the soul of American society. Beneath its bureaucratic language lies a bold, unfiltered social crusade. At the heart of its mission is a plan to reverse decades of hard-won social progress, pushing the country toward a rigid, ultra-conservative identity rooted in Christian nationalism. This is not accidental, it's intentional. Project 2025 describes a federal government that aggressively enforces traditional values. This includes eradicating protections for LGBTQ+ individuals, rolling back reproductive rights, and banning educational content that acknowledges systemic racism or gender identity. The plan calls for defunding or banning any government support for woke ideology, a term it uses to delegitimize equity, inclusion, and civil rights. One of its first targets, reproductive freedom. Project 2025 calls for a nationwide abortion ban, even though the Dobbs decision simply returned the power to states. It also proposes rolling back access to birth control, attacking the Title X family planning program, and undermining IVF treatments under the guise of protecting life. This isn't just pro-life, it's anti-choice in every form. LGBTQ Americans, especially trans youth, would face devastating consequences. The plan seeks to eliminate gender-affirming healthcare, force conformity in public schools, and remove any federal support for queer communities. The Department of Education would be used to enforce a strictly heterosexual binary curriculum, with teachers punished for discussing identity, history, or inclusion. Religious freedom would be into religious enforcement. Project 2025 envisions a state that promotes Christianity as the moral compass of governance, blurring the line between church and state. This is not about faith, it's about using faith as a weapon of power. This opens the door to moral policing, state-enforced purity culture, and the silencing of religious minorities. In sum, Project 2025 is a culture war by policy, where Trump's first term fanned the flames with rhetoric and symbolic actions. This plan would institutionalize discrimination at the highest levels of government. It doesn't just roll back rights, it rewrites the definition of freedom itself. If any of this sounds familiar, it should, because history has shown us this playbook before. Every authoritarian regime, from Mussolini's Italy to Putin's Russia, follows a similar pattern: consolidate power, rewrite law, control the message, target the vulnerable, and purge dissent. Project 2025 mirrors this progression, almost step by step, but now with the full weight of American institutions behind it. Authoritarianism rarely begins with tanks in the streets. It begins quietly through bureaucracy, through reshuffled leadership, through loyalist appointments and legal reform. Democracies don't die overnight. They die when laws are bent until they break. Project 2025 doesn't break the law. It rewrites it. Consider the use of Schedule IFA bureaucratic reclassification with explosive consequences. History shows that the destruction of independent civil services is one of the fastest ways to turn a republic into a dictatorship. Replace nonpartisan experts with loyalists, and suddenly science, justice, health, and truth become politicized overnight. We've also seen what happens when information is suppressed. From Nazi Germany's control of the press to rewriting of history, regimes survive by ensuring the public only hears what the regime wants it to hear. Project 2025's push to limit FOIA access, pressure the media, and silence educators mirrors this exactly, and perhaps most chillingly. The culture war isn't a sideshow, it's the gateway. Authoritarian regimes always begin by targeting those seen as other minorities, women, the press, the poor, the disabled, by stoking fear and moral panic. They create a justification for repression, disguised as protection. The United States has always relied on its institutions to protect democracy. But if those institutions are rebuilt from the inside to serve only one man or one ideology, then democracy becomes a shell. Project 2025 is not a policy proposal, it is an authoritarian toolkit dressed in patriotism, waiting for a willing executor. It's easy to look back at Trump's first presidency and see it as the peak of chaos, but that would be a mistake. The truth is, the real danger isn't what Trump did, it's what he didn't finish. Project 2025 is the plan to finish the job, and it's far more dangerous because it replaces improvisation with infrastructure, rage with precision, and personal vendettas with institutionalized authoritarianism. Trump's presidency was marked by moments of impulse and ego, Twitter meltdowns, surprise firings, improvised executive orders, and power grabs often blocked by legal or bureaucratic resistance. But what if those resistors were removed? What if Trump had walked into office on day one with a pre-approved list of loyal enforcers, a manual for dismantling opposition, and legal language ready to override dissent? That's what Project 2025 is, an authoritarian accelerator. It provides Trump or any hard-right successor with thousands of vetted names ready to replace career officials. It provides blueprints for weakening judicial independence, crushing political opponents under the weight of federal law enforcement, and reshaping education civil rights, immigration, and surveillance all in the president's image. It doesn't just hope to outmaneuver democracy, it plans to replace it. What's worse is that this time the machine is already built. Think tanks have written the playbook, funding pipelines are ready, loyalists are being trained and prepared, executive orders are pre-drafted. All that's missing is a man willing to pull the trigger, and Trump has already proven he's more than willing. And don't assume this ends in 4 years. Project 2025 is a generational agenda, a system designed not just to empower one presidency, but to lock in power for decades by eroding institutions and turning temporary victories into permanent fixtures. With a politicized Supreme Court and gerrymandered legislatures, the dominoes fall fast and recovery may take generations, if it's possible at all. We've seen warning signs in other countries, Hungary, Turkey, Russia. Each began with democratic elections and ended with centralized regimes. The danger in America isn't that democracy might collapse in a coup. It's that it might willingly hand itself over through votes cast in ignorance, apathy, or fear. This isn't just a second Trump term. It's a calculated attempt to make Trumpism permanent, even without Trump. And that's why it's worse than you think. This isn't a hypothetical. It's not a distant danger. Project 2025 is already written, already funded, and already in motion. It's the most detailed and aggressive plan ever assembled to shift the balance of American democracy. And all it needs is the right precedent to activate it. Everything we saw during Trump's first term, fired FBI directors, weaponized DOJ threats, efforts to overturn an election, were flashes of what could happen when a leader tests the edges of democracy. But now, the goal isn't just to test it, it's to replace it. Project 2025 doesn't just prepare for a Republican presidency, prepares for an American regime, one where loyalty replaces law, ideology replaces expertise, and obedience replaces rights. And it's not just about Trump. If he doesn't return to office, someone else can still use this plan. The infrastructure is built. The legal groundwork is laid. The operatives are ready. We often imagine authoritarianism as a sudden event, a coup, a violent takeover, tanks in the streets. But in reality, it arrives more subtly, through policy, through law, through silence, through a system that looks familiar on the surface, but underneath is no longer free. So the question now is not just political, it's existential. Will we pay attention while there's still time? Or will we look back, years from now, and wonder how we let a document like Project 2025 become the blueprint for our undoing? This is not just about one man, it's about a movement. And if we don't name it, challenge it, and reject it, it may never get the chance to vote it out again.